Okay, hello everybody. Really good to see you. Those of you who are watching live or watching the recording, I will be checking the Zoom just as people keep entering. Really good to get started. I've had quite a gentle start to the year. Personally, you may hear I've still got a bit of a cold, so I've been a little bit slow getting started with 2026. So if that's you as well, then fear not. We've got lots of time still for the rest of the year. But this is my first live of the year, so I am happy to be here. What I'd love to hear from you is, are you new to my world? Have you joined trainings before? Could you let me know in the chat if this is your first time, or if you've been following me for a while. Maybe I see some familiar faces, so some of us are working together. Yeah, Mark, it's rainy here as well. I'm in Poole down on the south coast, so usually we're blessed with beautiful weather, but not so much today, unfortunately. Oh, amazing. Good to see you again, Mark. New to you, Fiona, as well. Really great. Great, Nick. Good to see some new faces. Just saw my post this morning, Gerard, and I saw that you're in quite a similar space, so looking forward to hearing your insights as well. Yes, new to entrepreneurship, Jude, very exciting, but we've worked together a little bit. Maisana and Liz, you're in the Business Accelerator. Well, great, we've got a bit of a mix, so hopefully also a mix of experience. And for those of you who don't know me yet, and yes, Ash and I have met locally as I've actually ventured out of my house a few times, which is unheard of for me in the previous version of my business where everything I did was online. But as we'll be talking about today, I've ventured into more in-person and human interactions too. So let's get started. We're talking about the new Solopreneur Playbook, and I'm always a bit hesitant to make these bold claims and be dramatic. But I have been in business since 2013. So I left my corporate marketing job in 2013. I was in Geneva in Switzerland at Procter & Gamble, and I've had various business models and twists and turns along the way. So I started consulting, there was a bit of kind of freelancing, advising startups. I trained to be a coach. I had a very happy kind of digital nomad, what I call my hippie existence for a few years when I was traveling with my work. I then settled down back in London where I met my partner, and now we live, as I said, on the coast, and I've got 2 little children. So over that time, I've really tried and experienced a lot of different business models. So I have a lot of experience, both from corporate before, but also in terms of, freelancing versus contracting versus group programs and one-to-one and online and offline and so on. So that's on the professional side. And on the personal side, as I said, my life has evolved quite a bit since being, carefree and single a decade or so ago. And I guess luckily having built my business in a way that's really flexible to evolve with me and to be able to adapt to real life, because I think that's really what this is all about. I have another question for you. So I know a lot of you have said you're new to me, but how long have you been in business? So I'd love to get a bit of a sense. Jude said that she's new to solopreneurship. I know you're just getting started, but could you just pop in, a couple of years, 10 years, 20 odd? I just want to get a gauge for the experience we have in the room. Great, congratulations on 3 years, 4 years, 11 years, amazing, 4 months. What else have we got? 52 years. Gerard, you should be leading this session for me. Ash, 4th year, amazing, congratulations. Okay, go. Keep those coming in. My next question is, what have you seen recently? And by the way, I'll keep this in the chat for now, but I will open up for more interaction later on. So really great to see you all on camera, and I'd love to have a bit more sort of conversation. But for now, at least, just to keep it focused. I'd love to hear from you. What changes have you seen, especially those of you who've been for a long time, but in the last year or so, perhaps? What have you seen happening in the market? Have you been frustrated with anything recently? What have you been seeing in the last few months and year or so of working for yourself? And it may be external things happening in the market, or it may be things internally that you're kind of experiencing in terms of how you're showing up or how you're experiencing things now that you're no longer, most of you, no longer a beginner anymore. So what are some of the changes you've seen or frustrations you've seen? I've seen quite a few personally, given that I've been around for some time. Fee is saying more discerning buying decisions. Absolutely, I've seen that as well. Higher volume of work but lower revenue. Okay, yeah, the exchange rate is I was going to say a swear word. Is not good. Yeah, that's frustrating. Whether are those things outside of our control. What else? But that's great that you're seeing a higher volume of work though, Mozana. That's really good. It's frustrating that the monetary value doesn't match, but it's a good sign in a tough market to have more work. So congratulations. What else? What else have we seen? Anything in terms of social media or technology? Love that, Ash. Absolutely seeing that too. Busier market, need to be do more is the sense we have. Certainly be unique to stand out. What else are we seeing? And I know there's such a mix of experiences, so I'd really love to hear from you. You're seeing things as much as I'm seeing and the people I'm working with. I should say, I think I didn't even, to those of you who are new, hopefully you think I have something worth saying on this topic, given you're here. But I'm a solopreneur business coach. So I work with individuals like yourselves initially with that initial phase of leaving corporate. I've written a book, Leaving the Corporate 9 to 5, as well as Outside the 9 to 5. But as my own business has matured and as I've seen more challenges come into effect after that initial phase of starting the business, of course, that's very difficult and it requires a lot of courage and a lot of learning. But in fact, it's what happens next that I've become really interested in terms of how to make it sustainable and above all, how to make it fit around our life. More restrictive thinking. Tell me more, Chris, if you can briefly, and otherwise we'll pick up on that later. Making the same mistakes, okay. Knowing who I am, being more focused. I love that. And that's an interesting shift from the internal perspective, Fee, in terms of as we're a beginner, we might have an idea of what we want to build as a business, but it's very easy to, and it's a good thing to respond to traction in the market and say yes to lots of different things. But a few years in, we may find, oh, we've kind of built this Frankenstein model. We're building a business we feel we should be building. We're following some relatively generic business advice that may or may not fit with who we are. And certainly as we evolve out of that kind of beginner mindset and you know, over time become actually more confident, we become an expert who has something to say. I've certainly experienced this myself, that I feel perhaps I've sort of played too small to some extent because you're caught in the same habits and behaviors as you were as a beginner, but also in my case as I was with little children, and I was much more limited. They're still little, they're 5 and 6, but they're in full-time school now. And scary and exciting tend to come together, so that's normal. It's easy to get complacent. A lot of my initial coaching work was all around courage and getting out of your comfort zone, and I did that, quitting my job and traveling the world and so on. But the reality is it's very easy to quickly allow that comfort zone to shrink around ourselves again. So even after a decade, after 2 decades or more, you know, getting a little bit scared, getting a bit uncomfortable, either because we want to, we're ready to grow to that next level, or because the market kind of forces us to. So look, if you're feeling a bit frustrated by the changes in the market, then you're in the right place. You're not alone. If you're feeling that kind of internal call to maybe step into a more authoritative position and take on higher paid work or be a bit more visible, then you're in the right place. And above all, as I said, if you want to do all this, pursue your ambitions while living a life, so not compromising on family and health and your sanity, then you're also in the right place. So talking about, I guess, the trends I've seen in the market, we've mentioned quite a few of them there. The economic pressure, he who shall not be named, I'm not going to get into politics, but there's someone over the pond who's making some decisions that have had quite a big impact. I work with several people, in fact, in Africa and in the development space in Geneva as well. There's been a flooding of independence now to the market with the changes that are happening there. Last year with the DEI decisions as well, there was quite a lot of uncertainty. In fact, I spoke to a colleague who runs a startup who said last year was the toughest year they've ever had, having had a really sort of fantastic first few years in the market, growing and thinking, hey, this is quite easy. In fact, they found that last year was tough too. So hopefully it's both scary again, but also reassuring that it's not a you problem. The reality was it was a tough year. So again, congratulations to those of you who have had success during that time, but it has been difficult. And whether you've experienced clients ghosting you know, people, I've seen quite a few examples of purchase orders being raised for work and then actually the work doesn't materialize. People not responding, they say they're interested, but perhaps it doesn't happen. And again, as somebody said earlier, more discerning buyers, you have to kind of be more savvy in terms of ROI and really prove that this is going to make a difference, not just tick the box. So in a way, the market is maturing, I suppose. From a coaching perspective, you know, again, I feel old, but again, some of you are a bit more experienced than I am. 10 years or so ago, people could sell high ticket programs for $20,000 a year, $50,000 a year, and everyone was very excited. And, you know, a Facebook ad here or a post on LinkedIn was all you needed. Whereas now, nobody's mentioned AI. There's quite a bit of stuff happening in the world in terms of technology, and AI has leapt onto the scene and provides so many amazing opportunities for us. And I use it, I mean, many times a day. I just chose the curtains for our living room thanks to a quick render that I did on ChatGPT of our living room. So, you know, there's so many opportunities, especially for us as solopreneurs. But of course, it's also meant LinkedIn, which is my platform of choice, is just flooded with very similar, samey content. Ash was saying how important it is to stand out now amongst that, and it is harder. If you're a good writer, and I've thought of myself as a good writer, that seems to have sort of, you know, that advantage is gone to some extent in terms of the sheer amount that people can pump out. So, you know, pros and cons with that one. Attention fragmentation, choice paralysis, you know, because there are so many more, it's amazing that there are so many opportunities now to opt out of corporate and to work for ourselves and have that freedom and autonomy. But it does mean there are more of us out there now, and it means there's more noise. And we could see it, I guess, from a scarcity perspective, that it makes it harder, and it does. It also means the opportunity is bigger if we can get that clarity on who we are, what we stand for, and above all, to build those relationships. Yeah, I think those are the key things. I mean, even remote work, you know, COVID is now a distant memory. 5-6 years ago, you know, the Zoom and all these things are quite new. Initially, it was strange even to do something virtually, then everything became virtual. Now we're kind of coming back to in person, and the bar has been raised in terms of what we're delivering. It's no longer enough just to kind of do a virtual thing. We need it to be a bit more sophisticated. So external changes happening. Internally, as I said, a few things I talk a lot about, and I think this resonates, so let me know, but the corporate habits that we have, it's really quite difficult to unlearn some of those things, whether it's sort of asking for permission and validation, waiting to be told what to do to some extent, sort of chasing those external things like, unfortunately, you know, impressions and likes on LinkedIn and so on, wanting to reply to emails as soon as they come in. I had a business development call with a big company this week, and they had to reschedule due to their daughter being ill, which I was, of course, fully supportive of. But then the date she came back with, they were clashing with other things. And then I had a brief moment of thinking, oh, I'm going to move everything. And then I took a breath and I said, no, I'm not going to, you know, jeopardize sort of my own boundaries and my personal and professional things just for this possible client. And I stuck that boundary, and now we have a call booked in for next week. So, you know, there's a lot of temptations to think that we have to say yes to everything, and to compromise and so on. And that, I do think, comes a lot from corporate, where we had a boss and now we become our own worst boss. So there's the corporate hangover. There's the beginner mindset hangover, like the old you, as I said. For a lot of the time, you know, I showed up like I was a bit of a beginner. And in fact, those of you who are in the accelerator, we've had that conversation recently. In the accelerator, we have people really starting and getting going with the business, as well as people who are further along. But there's a massive shift we've seen from, oh my gosh, could I do this? If I did this, how could I get my first sale? And once you're through that phase, of course, the questions become much more sophisticated. It's like, oh, I can't continue with this, my limited capacity, you know, I need to shift how I'm working. I can't keep over delivering for clients, and I can't keep working evenings and weekends and so on. It's just not sustainable. So the level of questions we're asking are far more interesting, but also a little bit more complex. It's not something you can just kind of Google or ask ChatGPT, hey, how do I set up a website? It's far more nuanced in terms of how do I actually make this work around my life. So those are two big shifts, I guess I see, the external one and the internal one. And again, your own capacity shifts. Now, in my current situation, and I'm sure many of you, I know many of you have children, and it's just the example that's always front of mind for me, but it applies whatever your particular, you know, health conditions or caring responsibilities or just lifestyle that you want to lead. I now have the 39 weeks of the year, which is term time. I have, you know, the core school hours, give or take a little bit with after school clubs or whatever. And that's the time I have to play with. I can't compare what I'm building to some startup bro who has apparently 24/7, you know, hours available, get up at 4 a.m., do their ice bath, go for their run on the whatever. That's just not possible, and the business they're building. So the FOMO is real in terms of seeing the big in real life events that people are organizing, or communities, or they're traveling the world doing all these speaking engagements. And I have to remind myself, but no, that's not what I want to do. So having in mind my clear definition of success and my capacity. Having said all that, I don't see this as compromising. And I think this is one of the things we get in the way, right? It feels like a life first business is, it means I'm going to earn less. It means that I'm not going to be able to charge as much and so on. And I hope you agree. And if not, then hopefully by the end of today or in the near future, you will agree with me that actually those very constraints are what give us the competitive advantage, because having less time means that we have to focus on what really matters. And we all know that, I'm sure you've heard before, creativity comes from limitations. So if I sit with a blank piece of paper and could do anything at all, I'm completely lost. Whereas if you give me, okay, it needs to be within this, those are the criteria, and that's what you need to do, then suddenly I've got a lot more to play with. So I really see it as our advantage, as well as the necessity to build around what real life looks like. So, again, thinking about these changes, and I feel like I'm talking at you, but that is the idea of the masterclass, so there is an element of that. I tend to prefer a much more interactive format, but here we are. In terms of the old playbook, a few things. So first of all, with the business model, again, from what I've seen over the past decade, a lot of it was, and I call them gurus, but coaches or experts, pushing their particular model, and we sign up to courses and programs and things to learn, okay, the membership model is the best one, or no, now it's fractional, everybody should do fractional work, or no, you need to build an agency, or build a team, of course. Everybody has to do webinars. At one point I was doing these automated webinars where you kind of pretended that people were live, and that was the big thing, but then of course people said, oh, that's a bit inauthentic. Now the big thing is podcasts, and videoed podcasts, which is a bit frustrating because part of the advantage of podcasts was that it was just audio, and now we're filming them. It's all about in person. It's all about automation. The constant messages. Thinking back to my P&G times, I was in a digital role, and I found a couple of things quite interesting. That when digital came up, and this was a long time ago, I guess, but also quite recently, and it seems odd to think of it this way, it was such a new thing. And so to some extent, everything was changing, and we thought, oh my gosh, this is completely revolutionizing everything. And in another way, we weren't making dramatic enough changes. People were, I'm going to, have an app on the website, and we were kind of, let's get people liking our Facebook page. And it was all bolting things onto an existing model. So I think when things change like this, two insights from that experience for me. One is, the fundamentals still matter. You've all been running businesses. Most of you have been running business for years. You know that you need to know who you're marketing to. You need to know what you're selling. And, those fundamentals stay in place, whether there's AI or LinkedIn algorithms or whatever changing, Snapchat or TikTok or whatever the new channel, right? That's true. On the other hand, there's also a point at which just kind of incrementally tinkering with things at the edges isn't enough. And it can feel frustrating to have to break something that really is working, right? And does anyone resonate with that, in the sense that sort of I kind of feel that my business is working, not quite as well as I want it to, or not giving me the freedom I want. So I'm worried that if I break something that's working, that's going to kind of make me have to start all over again. I'm going to take a massive step back. Whereas it sort of feels safer just to, just push a little bit harder. I'll just post a bit more on LinkedIn, or I'll just kind of tweak this thing over there. The parallel I think of, and I think you will have all experienced this, is when you leave your job. It's quite scary to leave a job that's good, that's fine, right? It's easier, and you're forced to leave if it's a really toxic work culture, or if you're being made redundant, of course. If you're forced to leave, or it's so clear that you can't stay for whatever reason, then that's kind of easier to let go. Likewise, if you're in a business that, it's actually, it's quite good. It's okay. Like, it's actually very good. But there are some things, obviously, otherwise I think you wouldn't be here, that aren't working as you want them to. That is quite scary, to start tinkering with things and withdrawing programs that perhaps have been working for a long time, or changing how you're talking about yourself, or changing tack entirely, God forbid, not posting on LinkedIn every day and maybe thinking of something else, so that can be quite scary. So business model, first of all, I think we follow generic kind of blueprint advice, where the fact that something worked for somebody else doesn't mean it's going to work for us. We've got a totally different set of strengths and interests and, again, capacity and so on. Even if we get success following their model, we might not be happy with where we end up. And also this kind of just Frankenstein, as I said, kind of reacting to what's happening. And before we know it, we've built something that looks very different to what we had intentionally designed from the beginning. In terms of marketing and sales, again, as I said, did people experience this? When I first launched my group program, I think 2018 was my first group program, having done one-to-one. I could just post a couple of times and people would sign up. I went through a phase where we did these 5-day Facebook challenges, and we did those and everybody loved them, and people would, convert and everybody would buy the program. Things that worked in the past. And in fact, I've just shut down my Facebook group, boohoo, this week, because it just felt like a thing that was just kind of tiring for me. A lot of people aren't on Facebook anymore. It just felt like one more thing. So a lot of the strategies that worked in the past aren't necessarily working now. And also, I come from a marketing background, as perhaps some of you do too. I thought, and it was enough to do only marketing. But actually, in today's world, I would say that we're missing the next piece, which is the sales piece, right? Having an actual sales system. So a lot of us, and I'm sure a lot of you, rely on word of mouth and referrals, and that's great. But we have no control over that. And when those dry up, we can't sort of just kind of dial that up. If one day Mark and Ash and Nick recommend me and the next day nobody recommends me, that's quite stressful. So it's always a little bit of a precarious position to be in. But if you're finding that's drying up, even more reason to then think about, okay, how can I actually take a bit more control? And it might require more outbound, more systems, and building those relationships. So that's from a marketing perspective. And then ways of working. Has anyone heard the kind of hustle now to earn rest later mindset? I think a lot of the stuff I see from startups, and I'm seeing quite a few nods, are, you've got to put everything in now, work harder than you ever did in your corporate job now in order to earn rest and build in freedom later. But I see such a mistake in that, because if we build a business that's built in hustle, then it's going to be successful based in hustle. If I work with clients who don't respect my boundaries, who I'm always over delivering for and undercharging, that's going to become my habit, my behavior that I keep doing. They're going to be accustomed to that, and that's going to be the business I build. So I'm very much for, from the beginning, building in those boundaries, and I know it's hard, but actually setting out those frameworks and saying no and giving the space, building the space in from day one. One of my clients in the accelerator has just gone off traveling for a month, and there's no good time for that, right? There's no good time to have children. There's no good time to go. In fact, someone else is on a meditation retreat today. You just got to do these things if you want to do them. Don't wait until work has quietened down. Do it now. Do it today. So that's all me chatting. So I wanted to introduce the 3 pillars, I guess, that we want to talk about, and then have a little bit more interaction where you can ask questions and also really think about how this applies and where the biggest gaps are for you. I did share in the emails and on the website a couple of tools. There's the PDF scorecard, but a really fun custom GPT as well that you can interact with. And I know a couple of you have said that you've got some insights from there already. If you haven't already done so, it's a great way it kind of just walks you through some questions to think about, okay, from an income perspective, from the hours that you're working perspective, from the nature of the work you're doing, the clients you're working with, and so on. So if you didn't get that, happy to share that again. And of course, if you did get insights from that, please do share those today as well. But I'll pull up, of course, I just created this on ChatGPT, so that's another magic of AI. But these are the 3 pillars I want to talk to you about today, and we'll dig into them in as much detail as we can in the limited time we have today. But we've got design is the first one, demand is the second, and delivery. And those of you who are in the accelerator will recognize that these are very much built around the 3 pillars that we've been working on. So we talk about the intentional business model. We talk about authentic and consistent marketing and sales. And we talk about sustainable operating rhythms for the long term, right? So it's really having a clear business model, having the marketing that gives you that consistent demand without having to be always on, and then having the delivery to make it sustainable to run. So if we talk about design, I think we've already touched quite a bit on what gets in the way of that in terms of an accidental business model. Somebody was talking today on LinkedIn actually about how she had created a funnel that attracted the wrong audience into her offer, and then she thought, oh, I've got to change the offer in order to match the audience, rather than no, keep the offer that I've designed for a good reason and just change the mechanics of the funnel. It's very easy to be very reactive to what's happening, and then, as I said, lose sight of what we're wanting to build in the first place. So, given that I'm talking lots, I'm going to ask you another question in the chat. What is your vision? Why did you start this business in the first place, if that's still your vision now? And or what is your vision? What is the best case scenario? What is, if everything works out exactly as you want, what does that look like? I'm really curious to hear. What's your vision? Is it an empire? Is it, best-selling author on New York Times? What does your ultimate success story look like? I'll give you a moment to write that in the chat. I look forward to hearing what you're saying. So what is your vision, either as you left corporate now, the reasons for leaving, but perhaps more interestingly, how has that evolved, and what is the best case scenario for you? Let's see what comes up. What's interesting, I suppose, in terms of the evolution of this, and I'll talk while you're writing, is, for me, my vision as I left my job over 10 years ago probably wasn't well articulated, but that some of the themes are very much, freedom is the word that comes back most often. Flexibility was there, even though I didn't, as I said, have the family at the time. Authenticity was big for me as well. It was really being able to be who I was and not kind of having a work persona and a personal persona. And I think having your own business really gives you permission to show up as your authentic self, as we say these days. But the freedom at the time, as I said, I went, paddleboarding down the Mississippi. I headed off to a wedding in Denver, Colorado. I saw my friend in Melbourne. The freedom then was very different to what I see freedom as now. And allowing the business model to evolve as I evolve is really very helpful. And not possible with sort of a more rigid job. So we're seeing being able to choose the projects I'm passionate about, clients I want to work with. Yeah. Sometimes I try to dial it down to, or distill it down to, doing work I like with people I like, during the time kind of I want to be working. And it's really not asking too much. Ash is saying freedom, financial and time with your daughter, hobbies, and interest, absolutely. Financial freedom, and that's a lesson hard learned. I think when I first started, I kind of said, oh, money doesn't matter, and it's very easy to let the pendulum swing too far in the other direction, having been so caught up in money in the corporate world. But really, financial freedom is what allows us to pursue all these things, to be able to say no to clients, because we know we've got enough money to say no to a particular project. It means we can travel the world and take our kids on a safari or go to Disneyland or whatever that looks like, to take time off and actually be off. And it's a sign that people are valuing your work. If you're being paid, rewarded substantially, that's, as much as we shouldn't be counting only on external validation, that's really proving that we have a product, as it were, a service that is worth something, which is so important. So I'm curious, Gerald, I love that you're putting it in terms of solopreneur terms, but I'm curious what your vision of success is for you. So not just for your business, but really thinking about what does that look like for you in terms of how you're living your life. And Mark is saying a small number of high value clients wanting repeat business. Boundaries, love that, space for other things, and be brave with themes that weren't an option in corporate. Absolutely. There's things that we just kind of don't dare to say, we're not allowed to talk about when we're representing a bigger business or kind of corporate frame. Just be a team of one, absolutely. Flexibility to play around with different business models and different kind of a portfolio career, I suppose, coaching, courses, and be able to travel, take time off. Love that. Feel nourished in what I do. Living my life and not on the edges. Beautiful. So I don't know about you, but I don't think we're asking too much. And I also, at the same time, don't think that we're compromising. I think, if anything, we're being more ambitious. So I don't like the narrative, and I had a sort of viral post on LinkedIn before Christmas talking about the women leaving corporate, because there was this, without going down a rabbit hole there, Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In report came out saying that there was an ambition gap for women because we didn't want to follow promotions and so on. And as we see, more and more of us, and not just women, but more and more women as well, are leaving to start their own business. And everyone just came together saying we're not less ambitious. I think we're more ambitious because we're wanting the professional advancement and challenging work and working with interesting people, and to do all those things, have the impact. And we want to be able to do that while being with our daughter, climbing Everest, volunteering in a local community, running an Ironman, whatever that looks like, right? And I don't think that's too much to ask. Work is an important part of life, but it's not the only part of life. And I think retaining this vision, and keeping that top of mind is so important, and can become hard as we run a successful business, because we start focusing on metrics that are, more traditional, I guess, financial metrics. We're looking at revenue and sales and profit and that kind of thing. If we stick with this, what's the biggest gap you're seeing? Do you feel that you're living this? And we try to keep this brief because we're still in the chat, but where is the biggest gap? Would you say it is in the income and the financial freedom, because it's not quite consistent and abundant enough to be able to say no to stuff? Is it that you're doing work that you feel you should do? Are you not sticking to your boundaries? Where do you think the gap is between this vision and where you are today? Yeah, absolutely, Fee. I agree. It's more ambitious, right? We're actually sort of drawing outside the lines. We've got a broader, deeper, bigger world of opportunities to pursue our ambitions, and we can write a book. We can publish our own book. We can go after a publishing contract. Those are things that probably most people in corporate would never even consider. Starting a podcast, guesting on podcasts. I've been asked, I'm very proud of this, to go on BBC Radio tomorrow to talk about running a business, and that's not something that would ever, I think, have come up in my corporate role. So let's see, financial freedom, yeah, absolutely, to be able to turn work down. And that's real freedom, isn't it? Like I said, as much as you can have kind of fake freedom by just, I'm going to have a lie-in, I'm going to just do whatever I fancy, but that's not very sustainable. At some point, you're like, oops, actually, I need to be able to fund this lifestyle. And actually, that's where we realise that an element of hard work and the right kind of work is what gives us that financial freedom to be truly free. Being bold, that's interesting. So even though we can be more bold than we were in corporate, maybe it's hard to unlearn those habits. I certainly find myself being quite vanilla sometimes, even though I have strong opinions, maybe daring to speak out and realizing that, the world is not going to end if we have a bit of a point of view. I would even argue, that is, to Ash's point earlier about being unique and standing out, having a point of view is what helps you stand out. And if you're just regurgitating stuff that ChatGPT could have written, then actually what's the point? Yeah, super important one that Ash is saying, not getting influenced by the hype, and all those ever-changing options, right? This is the thing, you have to follow this one secret that's going to unlock everything. I think the good thing that comes with the maturity after, years in business, if you feel this as well, is that you become a bit more savvy, maybe a bit more cynical. So sometimes it could, we could maybe be a bit more naive and throw ourselves into something. I talked to my nephew over the weekend, who's 20 or so, and his optimism about his business success was incredible. And I think to some extent I'm a bit patronizing and think, oh yes, you don't know how hard it is, but also he's got such an advantage, because if we're too cynical and too sort of, oh no, that will never work, we really hold ourselves back. So I think an element of rainbow unicorn land is actually quite good to maintain and not become too cynical. The other part of that, I think, is that the stuff by definition, the loudest voices on the internet are the ones with a big team, with a big budget, and who have like a really polarizing opinion. That is what the algorithm likes. It's what the news channels like, right? It's what's being pumped out. So unfortunately, as we're consuming online, the messages we're seeing by definition are going to be pushing that this is what you need to be doing to chase, the LinkedIn algorithm and your 7 secrets to the 7-figure business or whatever else it is. Like, those models are the ones that we're going to see. So a big part of it is putting blinkers on to some extent, finding people, and we've got a great start here today, who are like-minded and share your ambitions and values and principles and boundaries, finding communities like that and having the accountability to have the courage to build differently, and not to be swayed by all those hypey posts online. Feel ready for more, but not in traditional sense. Yeah, that's interesting. And again, I'm saying this sort of vulnerably because I'm living it right now. I'm at that moment when I'm thinking I really want to push the boundaries on what's possible in terms of what I'm earning within that boundary of my life and the kids and so on, being a bit more bold in terms of doing in-person stuff, speaking, traveling, writing the next book. So I feel a little bit uneasy and nervous, but that's also what makes it exciting and gets a bit of that kind of beginner energy again. Consistent, well-paying work is the ultimate. That is the primary goal always, right? And really, that's the sign of a successful business model. And again, the thing that unlocks everything else. Stability into the middle distance. Love that. Yeah, and feeling small and safe. Absolutely. Love that, and thinking about the other areas outside of your work as well. And then stopping things that are no longer serving you. Let's pause there as well. So that's it. I think one of the many gurus I saw online, Chris Williamson, he's just kind of exploded into my feeds recently, but as is often the case, he's been around for a decade or so. But in one of the little reels I saw, he was talking about you have to assume that your capacity is what it is now. Don't think that like in 6 months' time or a year, suddenly you're going to have 30 more hours to play with. So actually designing around that and realizing that you need to drop some things, stop some things in order to make space. And that is scary because we're letting go of things again. We're breaking things that kind of are working from a business perspective, but also from a mindset perspective. Maybe we're having to challenge some of the habits and stories that have been serving us until now, but are actually holding us back. Some of my stories around, you don't need a big audience because this kind of business, as we're talking about, is kind of a small number of clients paying premium prices. I don't need a massive audience. And yet I begin to think, okay, but what could be possible if I did have a bigger audience? Because then the more you have in at the top of the funnel, the more you're able to say no to the wrong clients and so on, right? So sometimes you can hold on to stories and you can be very virtuous, and I can think, oh yeah, I don't need a big audience. But then if I start rethinking it, perhaps there is a way to do that while still staying true to my values and not still, chasing the algorithm and getting totally caught up in the hamster wheel of content creation. But it's a fine balance, and it's much more nuanced than the expert advice that we get online that would have us believe. Okay, so in terms of the design, thinking of the vision and then thinking of the business model that matches that vision, right? Without going into too much detail, it's pretty obvious when you talk about it. If my vision, is to have this 39 week a year term time working, I mean, that's not just the vision, but that's the reality of the capacity of what I have. And on top, I want to do X, Y, Z. I can't then launch a membership that requires me to be available and do a weekly training. I'm always a bit reluctant to do lives for that reason, and I don't like committing to being on every week, let's say, because that's not compatible necessarily with health or with the kids or with holidays and so on. So there's that disconnect. We have the vision, but then before we know it, we're working with corporate clients who don't respect our boundaries, who are emailing us in the evening, et cetera, right? So it's just making sure that the model we're choosing then, whether it's fractional, which has lots of advantages, but also some restrictions, or the more traditional consulting model, or freelancing, coaching, consulting, all the nuances of one-to-one versus group, online, offline, etc., and the pricing and everything, making sure that really matches the vision that we have. And without going into that detail, I've done this in many workshops before, but taking the number of, even the numbers of what you want to earn and do the maths. I always take 100K just because it's the easy maths one, but whatever you want to earn in a year, 250K, 500K, knock yourself out. But dividing that over the hours that you have available, only half of those hours are going to be billable. Oops, suddenly you realize that your time is very, very precious. And as I said before, this is what makes you more commercially strong, because of those restrictions. You have to get smarter, you have to get clearer on your positioning, you have to really find the clients who respect those boundaries, who are willing to pay, and so on, right? So it is hard and it takes time to do it, but actually it forces you to make those choices that probably you should have been making in the first place. And then the final piece of the design is really roadmap. So that's, of course, it's all very nice to have this big vision and we want to do everything right now. The example that comes to mind for me was in 2018 when I wanted to launch my first group program. I also wanted to write my first book, and I wanted to launch the podcast. Now, it seems easy. I didn't have children at the time. I could have done that, but I wanted to do all three at the same time. And of course, I ended up doing none of them. So what I did was I decided that the program was the most important. So I launched that in February. I must have slowed down then, because then I decided that the book would be launched on my birthday in October. And then I think I launched the podcast sort of end of December. So I just managed it in that year. But it's just, the fact that you now have these ambitions and we're playing, I want to do more speaking and I want to write my next book and I want to charge more and I want to launch this program, great. There's an element of let's paint that picture and map it out and so on. But then realistically, doing all those things at the same time is going to make us do none of them. So having the roadmap of thinking, especially actually just what's the next 90 days that we're going to do, is a really useful way to look at it. So thinking about the design, I guess, think to yourself, if I can leave you with a thought on this one, and this is the one that requires the most work. It seems the most frustrating because it feels maybe, I know all this stuff, I've done my vision board or I know my goals, etc. But allowing yourself a bit more space to have that beginner mindset again. How has your vision evolved? How has your capacity evolved? Have your ambitions grown? Are you actually more in a season of kind of maintenance now? No worries at all, and I love that balance, Mark. I'll send the recording out, so thanks for role modelling that, and hope you can watch the rest of the recording later as we get into the more tangible pieces. So really thinking about how you are evolving, again, responding to those market dynamics as well, and thinking about what the next vision is. And don't hold yourself prisoner to what former you wanted, okay? So you may well have evolved and it can feel like, I've put all this effort into this thing, but actually if you've changed, it's far better to change now than to wait further down the line. Any questions on the design piece? I guess that first pillar, and maybe question, or if you have an insight from this, does it spark anything? Do you want to pop anything into the chat in terms of, no, actually my vision is pretty clear, my model matches that, I'm all good, or oops, maybe I need to do a bit more work on that. What's coming to mind for you in this first pillar? And I love that. And Fee, and she's saying, so no appetite to have premises and people. And a lot of the business advice is build the team. Pre-COVID, at least, it was have an office, it's have the software and the automation and all the tech and so on. And, it's how you define it, but you can be a solopreneur. I have an accountant, of course. I have a podcast editor. I had a graphic designer. I had a website development team. You can have these people around you, certainly an assistant. Just because you're a solopreneur doesn't mean you have to be solo. But it also doesn't mean that you have to have a business and you have to have, the big debate is always, do you have your own name or do you have a different name and all this stuff, that you get to make this up yourself. But really the type of business we're talking about is being an expert with a relatively small number of high-paying clients and that manages around our work. It doesn't require huge infrastructure and investment and so on, and it's easy to get caught up in the whole kind of VC investment funding, startup rounds and hustle culture and so on, which just isn't relevant for us at all. Okay, well, share any insights as I move forwards, and we can of course come back to it at the end. In terms of the second one, this is maybe the big one. How do we feel about marketing? Love it? Hate it? Where are we in terms of, and a couple of you said that your goal was really, the bit that's missing is to have that consistent demand. And that's really the goal coming in. Hate it? Yeah, I feel you. I love it, but I don't love it when it's not working, right? It's fun to do things when people are showing up and they're paying. It's not so fun when you feel like, the algorithm is punishing me or it's taking time away from the work I really want to do. Anyone else? Don't have experience with it, fear it. Yeah, absolutely. Learning to love it. Love that, Ash. Please share your tips for the others how they can love it. But learning to love it, and it is a long journey, but part of it is finding something that you can love. And you need to know the difference between, again, the example I have is doing video. Now, you may judge if I'm good or not at video now, but I was certainly not good when I started. And I was trying to record like a video series, and I was in Hawaii at an Airbnb at the time. And I've got so many bloopers I can't tell you, because first it was just and the wind and the mosquitoes or whatever else was going on. And then I did it so many times again and again that by the end I had a migraine. It was really unnatural and sounded absolutely awful. And yeah, I just thought this is never going to work for me. But I did a lot of amateur drama. I do like talking and performing. So I thought this is something I can practice and get better at. And in fact, I worked with a video coach very briefly, just one session with them. And then what I did was I did like a daily Facebook Live probably you can find it, but I hope you won't go and look for it. It was pretty awful. But just the act of going live once a day, got me out of that fear and got me into, okay, great. And of course, over the last decade, I now have a teleprompter and a proper video, and I've upgraded things in this kind of software I'm using now. On the other hand, if you're like, I will never like video, I do not want to be on camera, no way, Jose, no amount of training or mindset work is ever going to help me, then please don't even go down that route, right? It's just a waste of your time. To be successful, to be effective, you need to be doing it consistently. So if you love going to events and talking to people, if you love speaking on stage, if you love talking maybe on podcasts, hopefully audio, but as I said, unfortunately, a lot of them are being filmed now, that's a great avenue. But finding something that you enjoy and that you can stick with. It'll still be hard. You still need to learn the skill. But do find something that works for you and don't do it just because you have to. So one of the biggest issues here, apart from doing something because you feel you should, is, and all the groups I'm in, and we see it in the accelerator, see it in a speaking group I'm in, and I see it on LinkedIn, we're optimizing for the wrong metric. We forget what we're working towards. People say, oh, I'm so frustrated, I'm not getting the likes on LinkedIn, the views are down, I used to get this many and now I get this. But are you a content creator? Are you being paid by the number of impressions? No, LinkedIn is the means to an end. It's one of the means, right? It's one way to get visibility. And in fact, ironically, it's probably not even the best way anymore. And to get into the detail, but commenting on someone else's post probably gets you more visibility than writing your own post. Likewise, writing a couple of really good posts is probably going to get you more business than trying to write some average rubbish that ChatGPT is pumping out every day, So one of the biggest issues is we optimize for the wrong metric. We're just getting caught up in, I've got to optimize for likes and so on. We forget that we're not content creators. We're doing LinkedIn because it gets us clients. And if it doesn't get us clients, you know what? Either we change how we're doing it or we stop altogether and do something else. So again, I was joking before about I actually leave the house these days, but I'm finding success in doing talks, even unpaid talks for local co-working spaces or organizations. Speaking for free gets you in front of new audiences, right? In a way that builds trust. And in fact, Ash and I met in a sort of a what was it called? Planet Pastry. It's always given they got pastry, cakes, coffee, anything like that is always a bonus. No worries at all. Thanks so much. Having those in-person links is such a good way to build trust and to really, especially in the age of AI, to make those human connections. And again, I think that as a solopreneur is our big advantage versus the massive corporations that can throw money at stuff and team and so on. So those are some of the issues. So the three things we work on, I've got to show it here because I've got the screen up. Three things in the accelerator and in the programs that I run. We look at visibility, authority, and momentum. So quick one, and then I'd love to hear from you where you think there might be a gap for you. So visibility is getting in front of new people. They need to know that I exist, right? It doesn't matter how wonderful you all think I am. If you're the only people who ever see me, then that's no good. That's never going to grow. You're going to get frustrated if I keep selling to you the same stuff forever. I'm pretty sure you'll unsubscribe from my emails. So getting in front of the right people with the right message, new people. The second one is then building that authority. They need to understand that you know what you're talking about. They trust you to deliver the thing, getting to know you a bit more kind of longer form content. And then the final one, which a lot of us are often missing, is the actual connecting the dots. Yes, they've liked your post. Yes, they've been to an event, but hang on a second. Are we actually then, I almost said push there, but nudging them towards the close to actually sell something to them? And that's what a lot of us are missing. So putting those three out, if you can pop in the chat, where do you think, either where you're really good, maybe you're really good at sort of the top high level visibility stuff, but then you don't do the follow up, or the other end of the spectrum, maybe you're really good and actually everybody who knows you thinks you're amazing, but there's just not enough people who know you. So is the gap, would you say, at the top that you're not kind of getting enough visibility with new people, or is it rather in the final stages of, I send one email and then I feel like, I'm being a bit annoying, so I hold back, or I don't respond to anyone who comments on my stuff because I feel like that would be annoying to them. Where's the gap, do you think, in the top end of the funnel, as it were, or is it the bottom end? Nick's saying visibility. Oh, Maisana too, visibility, okay. What else? Anyone else? Visibility. Oh, interesting, okay. And why do you think that is, if you don't mind sharing a bit more? Is it that you fear marketing? Is it that you're kind of exhausted by the whole LinkedIn algorithm thing and you're just not getting traction? Is it that you don't know where to focus? Oh, this is really interesting. So in the accelerator recently, we've seen that actually it's the momentum piece that is been the biggest gap, because it's all very well to post and go to things, but then we're a bit tentative maybe in the early years to, we don't want to ask for the sale, we don't follow up. Whereas actually what we see in the stats is that people say yes after sort of the fifth time you talk to them. And for this workshop, and it's great to see a good group of you, but you know, the outbound messaging that tells people it's happening, reminds them, you will have hopefully got a sort of 24-hour, 10-minute before. It's such a, you know, there's a lot needed in today's age of being so overwhelmed, and there's so much information overload, isn't there? But a lot of you are saying actually visibility is a gap. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, no, Ash is saying momentum. Great. So wherever your gap is, if it is visibility, you just want to make sure you're focusing on the right thing. If it's visibility, what might be some of the things that you would do? Someone said that they're not doing any social media. So what are you doing, or what could you do? Would you say? Perfect. And if you're redefining your role, of course, it's probably worth holding back a little bit to have that clarity before you go out marketing. So that's perfectly normal. Some of the things you could do, as I said, is obviously comment on other people's posts if you're a bit scared of posting to begin with. If you are a bit more confident and experienced, as many of you are, pitching yourself to guest on other people's podcasts is a great way to get visibility. You don't have to have your own. It's far more work to have your own. You could pitch yourself to the media, of course, whether it's being an expert or writing or contributing to an article, or again, go to your local media. You know, you don't have to go on international BBC from day one. You can really start with the little ones who are always looking for content. You know, that could be visibility. Authority, you could run a workshop like today. It's giving people a real chance to get a feel for your style, get to know you, get to see if they click with both your approach, your point of view, and how you're working, and really nudge them that bit closer to perhaps working with you if that's the right thing. Podcasts as well actually are kind of long form. You know, it's an opportunity for people to really listen and let the words kind of flow over them. Or my favorite clients are often the ones who say, oh, I've been listening to your podcast for 6 months, you know, because they've really absorbed, they've already done some things, and they're really bought into what I'm talking about. So that's always a great way to do that. And then momentum, if that one is something to work on, part of it is finding the time, right? But if we can cut down on the time we're wasting on some things that perhaps aren't moving the needle, then having just those little pockets of time during the week to, of course, respond to anyone who wants to give you money. So if someone's saying, hey, Mezana, I want to work with you, then please do reply to them. Following up with people who said they wanted to, but perhaps you haven't heard back from them. Also, messaging people who have interacted with you on LinkedIn. If you see someone consistently responding to your polls and comments and so on, you know, as long as they're not just a competitor to you who's trying to get some little cheeky visibility, but if you can see that that's a potential relationship, then by all means message them. Send a note to your existing network where you have those relationships to you know, this is what I'm doing right now. Do you know someone who? Those kinds of things seem so straightforward when I say them, but unfortunately we often miss out on those. So we do all this work on getting the amazing visibility, and then we just have kind of a leaky bucket where they all go out. So I hope that gives you a bit of food for thought on where you might focus there. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly, it's actually anchoring the big picture vision in your day-to-day habits. And I think that's where the disconnect often happens, in that we say that we want one thing, but then the reality of business as usual and kind of just busy work really, and again, sharing my own situation, because I now have such a complex machine to some extent. I've got so many things. I've got the books that I never take the time to promote. I've got the podcast, which needs a new episode every week. I'm in a pretty consistent LinkedIn pattern. I've got my newsletters for B2C and B2B. You know, there's so much stuff that purports to move the business forward. But if you're just caught in that kind of business work and you forget to follow up with the leads, and I forget to do kind of new visibility stuff or that authority stuff, then actually I can feel like, oh, check me out. I've got a business and I've got all this stuff, but it's not matching then my income. Speaking of that, one more reassuring thing to say on demand. I have two colleagues that come to mind now, one on Instagram and one on LinkedIn, both of whom have huge followings and their income just does not match that following. So again, just in terms of getting obsessed with these numbers, having 150,000 followers on Instagram or the 50K on LinkedIn or whatever doesn't necessarily mean that they're the right people, that they're resonating, that they're buyers. You can play the game of optimizing for the LinkedIn algorithm, and that doesn't necessarily translate into sales. That's just something to remind yourself when you're a bit sort of, I'm not getting the traction. Make sure you're focusing on the right metrics. So in terms of making it sustainable, where might be the gaps here for you? So do you have really clear habits of what you're doing? And that, by the way, of course, is all the wonderful things that you're talking about in terms of being with your children and doing your exercise and all those things, but also actually those visibility, authority, and momentum activities. This week, I've got a full week of delivery. Last week, I had a very quiet week. So last week, I could do a lot of extra stuff. I sort of revamped my speaking website. I worked on some back-end stuff. I had a lot of strategy time. I prepared workshops and all sorts. This week, it's just kind of survival mode, get through everything I need to do. And it's just knowing that you're going to have those rhythms and cycles. Sometimes you'll not be very well and you need to be kind to yourself as well. But having those things, the habits that you're doing every week. Well, every week at minimum, even if I've got a busy week of delivery, I'm at least going to, and I'm making this up, send 10 connection requests on LinkedIn, 5 messages to people I've worked with in the past, making sure I'm, of course, answering anyone or following up with anyone I've promised to follow up with, So having the bare minimum and having that kind of weekly routine that even when you're fully busy with your contracts and things, that you're still doing the business development activities that are going to get you new clients in the future. Because otherwise that's where you get the feast or famine. That, check me out, I've got all this work, don't do any business development, and then before I know it, I've got nothing, and then I'm having to do that work again, and then I get too much work, and then too little work, and that's where the issues become. So as much as we want freedom, again, true freedom actually does require a bit of structure and repeated habits. A lot of us are creative, and we like the flexibility and so on, but even within that, having a loose structure and framework and like a really clear set of things that you need to do every week can really help to avoid that kind of roller coaster. Boundaries. How good are we at setting boundaries? Do you feel you're good at kind of saying no to clients and putting things off, or saying, I'm not free then, but, or actually that's not included, so we need to increase the scope or increase the budget? Those are all kinds of things that possibly are easier for you now than they were when you started out. When we start out, I think we feel we need to say yes to everything. Anecdotally, whenever I'd said yes to having a call during a holiday or doing something more quickly or whatever it was that didn't feel right, every time the client has cancelled, doesn't show up to the call that I've sort of put in the middle of my holiday, or things have moved around or whatever it is. So I've learned to listen to those warning signals, and sometimes, yes, to say no to income, but knowing from experience that will be so stressful, having the kids banging on my door when I'm trying to do this thing, or trying to call in from a hotel room and the Wi-Fi is really bad, and is it really worth it? And it might be worth it. There's a pain in the bum tax that people talk about. If you give me $500,000, then probably I'm happy to take a call on my holiday. That's just me. You can buy my time, but if it's within reason, I think generally sticking with our boundaries is something we're not going to regret, whereas saying yes to things that don't feel right is very much more likely to lead to regret. And then systems. And to some extent, systems is very much linked to sort of the habits and things, and it can feel a bit uncomfortable either if we're not super organized or techie and so on, but it doesn't have to be complicated. Again, the kind of advice we get from online is all about these complicated automations and things, and we invest in software. I don't know about you, but I've got all these now sort of software subscriptions I'm paying for, and before you know it, we're paying thousands of pounds for things that aren't necessarily necessary, let alone kind of effective. If you just have a handful of clients, arguably you can probably do some things individually and manually that don't require automation. But documenting systems, having those standard operating procedures, is helping you not to reinvent the wheel every time. It means that when you are ready to outsource to someone, that's already in place and you can go, hey, this is how it works. It means that if there is a free tool or something that can automate, then you can hand it over, right? So it's just, as always, the nuances between a massive automated machine and so on, but also finding the things that work for us. a few areas that can work. Obviously, content creation, repurposing, having like a really clear way to do that. My little win, and I have played quite a bit with different AI tools, but specifically ChatGPT is the one I pay for. And I know if you know anything about AI, it's not the best tool, everyone says, but for me, at least the way I've set it up, it does work very well. I previously had an assistant and quite a complex process of using a little bit of AI as well. Using just a lot of back and forth to take my podcast episodes and create transcripts and show notes, etc. I'm pleased to say that I literally press one button now and it gives me my show notes, it gives me my SEO optimized title and description and this and that for the podcast host and for the website and a post here and so on. It's just sometimes a little bit of getting outside of your comfort zone, a little bit of maybe asking for help, a little bit of taking one step back to be able to take two steps forward actually can break something that's working, but save so much time. And that, of course, is the opportunity with AI as well, that we can, as a solopreneur, suddenly we've got this huge support system around us. Having said that, I may have shared with some of you in a previous session last year, I set up this very complex kind of board of advisors. I had a chief of staff and CMO and COO and all sorts, and it just became far too complex. So you'll be pleased to hear that I've collapsed that together and I just have one that I speak to now. But it's a bit of trial and error. No one really knows with AI, but certainly there are tools there that can obviously really, really help us, and it's worth looking at those. So on this one, where do you think your biggest gap is in terms of, is it that you tend to be a little bit too flexible and spontaneous in terms of when you do things? Is it that you get kind of too busy with the delivery and you forget to do that business development stuff? Is it that you're a bit afraid of tech, I suppose, and you don't like getting into all those things even though they could help you? Do you overinvest in tech and you love that kind of stuff and you're geeky and you spend too much time and money on it? Or is it the boundaries, do you think? Where do you think the biggest opportunity is for you? Bit too flexible. And then, of course, and you don't have to answer it now, but thinking about what from what I've said or from your experience, because a big part of this is also trusting your own instinct and experience, given that you have that experience, can help you to learn from the places where you have said yes, like I did, to things that then you regretted, or we don't have to suddenly now rip everything up and start again, right? Just try for the next call you go with a slightly higher price, or for the next one you gently say, oh, I can't make that time, but I can make this. Just here and there start kind of dialing up a little bit the boundary, and dialing down the flexibility in that sense. Yeah, it can get so overwhelming, can't it? And of course, it's a question, do you have more time or more money? Because if you've got more time, you can do a bit of kind of trial and error and play around with things and see how it goes. Or if you've got more money, then there are courses, there are experts who can help you. I had a colleague who helped me a little bit with the AI and the custom GPT, and that was really fantastic. I realised actually that I could do more than I thought, which is always good. Habits, yeah, the boom bust cycle, it's so common, isn't it? And to some extent it's natural. Again, I think for me the challenge with the term time thing is that last year January, February was quite slow, and then oops, it's Easter, oh, it's summer, Christmas, and before you know it the whole year's gone. Like, oops, my income that seemed pretty good, actually, if you then divide that out with all those long holidays and things, perhaps, and some of them are in your control because you're choosing to take the time off, and some are because the market is what it is. I had a client who worked in the wedding industry, and of course the summer was super busy, and then we were looking at how can we kind of flatten things out a bit with maybe doing some graduations or birthdays or other kind of ceremonies outside of those times. For me, and for those of you who want to work term time, it means actually you need to be earning more in the weeks when you are working. And we need to be realistic about the seasonality we see, either in the industry like weddings. Retail is so busy in the autumn, the Christmas period, that they don't even have time to reply to my email. Maybe it's the cycle of the beginning of the financial year is really good for your clients. If you're in health and wellness, this January kind of new year, new you energy is always very helpful, but it also means that everyone else is talking about that. But it's, again, the maturity that you can bring now that you're in business for so long. You can understand your own rhythms and cycles and seasons, as well as looking at what the patterns are, looking at the whole year. And I've got this perpetual year planner here now. I've blocked in all, and it's dangerously big, all the holidays in there, all of our calls for the accelerator, my new program, The Architect, anything that's kind of already kind of set in stone really is there, and it just really helps you to see, and obviously you can do the maths and so on to make sure that the numbers are working, because I know finances were the big piece that some of you said. Yeah, and definitely, I know you're in a slightly different position, Jude, starting out, but it's so helpful. I hope you agree to come to these things and understand how to avoid some of the pitfalls that some of the rest of us have maybe made, and to think about these things as you start and set those boundaries, especially if you're not in sort of really urgent state of having to bring in X amount of money right away. We can be a bit more sort of calm and confident and assertive, I guess, in our choices. So a little bit of a recap, I guess, just to talk about the old playbook. By that I mean a couple of things. By one, I mean that the market has changed in terms of the flooding of independence to the market, which again I see as a positive, but can be challenging for those of us who've been around since before. When I first started posting on LinkedIn, that it was hardly a thing, so it was quite an advantage. And now all these upstarts are coming out and posting, and of course AI is a big piece there as well. Again, the uncertainty of the economy, Ukraine, Trump, DEI, the UN organisations, and so on, depending on what sector you're working in, these are all having an effect. And then thinking on the internal side, corporate habits that we're trying to unlearn, perhaps still, maybe we have recreated our job in the business that we've built, holding on to past you, again, that kind of beginner mindset, even though we're far more advanced, and actually we have something to say, and to have the courage to be a bit more bold, to be more confident in articulating our point of view. Again, I'm thinking back with positive thoughts on this post I wrote in December. I don't often write that kind of thing, but clearly it resonated. 20,000 odd views so far, and people keep talking about it every day. And it goes, okay, if you look back at, let's say, if you are active on LinkedIn, your top posts of last year would be interesting to see, because certainly mine have been the ones with a point of view, where I'm sharing my personal experience, and not any of the amazing, thoughtful how-to and strategic content I've been putting out is not in the top 10 at all. It's all that kind of personal stuff and the strategic, the more provocative things as well. So think about that. So that's sort of the old in terms of old you and the old world. And then thinking, I think this is not new news. It's pretty straightforward, right? It's the business model, it's the marketing and the sales, and it's how you're delivering and the systems. But just hopefully having that framework to help you see a little bit more systematically where the gap is for you. And I'm curious, final question, I guess, in terms of that is, where do you think you want to focus now going forwards? Is it coming back to, not to the drawing board, but revisiting your vision, reminding yourself, excuse me, of what you're building and why that's important? Is it that, or actually, I do need to lean into that visibility piece more, as a lot of you said. I know I've got something good, and actually the people I'm working with are getting amazing results. I'm getting a high conversion from the people who do talk to me, but I'm just not getting enough people. Is that the opportunity? And having the permission, I suppose, to do it in your own way. If you hate social media, can you go offline and do it via real events and conversations and those kinds of things, right? So do play around with it a little bit. I'm still posting every day on LinkedIn. I'm desperate to pull back and not do so. So we'll see. I think after this kind of next few weeks, I'm going to see how I can get a bit more creative with how I do that as well. And then finally, delivery. It's not very sexy, but ultimately the day-to-day is exactly that is life, right? So we can have this beautiful vision board on the wall, but if the day-to-day doesn't match up to that reality, that's where there's a bit of a disconnect. So is that where the biggest gap is? So feel free to share in the chat if you want to, but obviously if you want to keep it personal, that's fine too, and we can talk about it afterwards as well. Yeah, Chris, I'm glad that resonates. I've loved it too. Again, I always say it a bit tongue-in-cheek. I'll probably stop doing that now because it's been a while, but I have got so much from also going more locally. It seems very counterintuitive because I've always had a very global audience. My parents are Swedish. I lived in Switzerland. I have, I think, on my website that I've coached people on all except one continent. So Antarctica, if anyone knows anyone there, I'd love to coach somebody there. But, I've had a very international audience, but it makes it really hard, actually, if I do want to organise a local event. I don't expect people to fly from South America or Asia, and it's hard with time zones and so on. So I've loved meeting Ash and a few of you others at local events. People say, oh, you're Anna, or I've listened to your podcast and I see you there and it's so lovely. Whether they pay to work with me or not, just having those connections, you recommend each other, you just get to know each other, you feel part of that community. And yeah, I love sort of talking to people and having more of that interactive thing. Just sitting at home pumping out content and doing Zoom calls probably isn't why we started our business in the first place. Yeah, and I think you do become very resilient right over those years. You have seen the financial crisis, you've seen COVID, you've seen the explosion of AI and so on. To some extent, that allows us to be quite old and wise and say, you know what, I know that we're going to withstand this storm, and everyone says things are changing fine, but I know that, this is going to still be important. And at the same time, be flexible and adapt and be ahead of it too, because again, things are fine. We don't want to quit the job when things are fine. We don't want to break the business if it's okay, but we want to get ahead of it. So rather than wait until we burn out, or wait until the sales dry up, or wait until, LinkedIn doesn't work anymore, it's so powerful to actually take the time now to again reconnect to that vision. I'm seeing lots of nods to really think about what's going to, and even if you don't know the answer, just asking the questions is a great thing to do. Experimenting, play around with different ways of building, and having, again, that sort of trust in yourself that actually at this stage of my business, I do have the knowledge and experience and expertise to know what's best, and to try doing that before the burnout, before the business fails, before AI completely takes over, whatever. It's also what makes it more fun, because I know there's a big piece around consistency and showing up and doing the same thing. But I think a lot of us do this because we like to be creative and entrepreneurial ideas and try different things. So why not kind of tap into that and really enjoy the process of experimenting and getting a bit scared again, I suppose, after years of maybe feeling very comfortable and very confident. Why not challenge ourselves to again be a bit uncomfortable again, and seeing where that leads us. So look, that's what I have for you today. I do have another 10-15 minutes. I know it's a big chunk of time, so if you do need to let go, not to worry. If you've been watching the replay, then do ping an email to let me know how you got on and if you have any questions. But I'm happy to take questions now. In terms of, I guess, again, the context of this, I guess, if you're wondering, I've been leaning more into this now, I suppose, but really it's been something I've been talking about for 10 years or so. As I said, my book, Outside the 9 to 5, actually talked about the 5 pillars. And this is an evolution of that. So it's not new news in the sense of sort of scrapping everything before, but it's just what I'm seeing in terms of really distilling down to what matters. And ultimately, what matters is, we need to be doing good work with people we like, as we said, and we need to be getting new clients. But within that, we have the lens of actually wanting to live the life we want to live and have that freedom and the flexibility, and whether it's the kids or the travel or whatever it is. So it's just that extra nuance that it's not just about a business that works on paper financially and according to some kind of blueprint that we found, but really it needs to work for us. And that's where it gets a little bit more nuanced and complicated, because there's no exact blueprint to follow, but it's also what means that we get to create whatever we want to create. So I have, as I keep mentioning, the accelerator. So I've actually, I'm pausing the accelerator to some extent. The accelerator is a mix of curriculum and accountability. And what I'm doing now, in fact, is I'm launching a new program called Architect. So Architect is a 12-week program that's going to really dig into this and help more experienced solopreneurs really think about how they're redesigning, how they're building differently for this next stage of their business. And then I'm looking at having another kind of support program, I suppose, in terms of accountability. Really excited about building more of this community side, because there's so many of us doing incredible work and who want to build differently. And I'd love for us to get louder online, insofar as we want to do that, in terms of voicing that there is another way to build that doesn't require these kind of marketing bro strategies and being always on and whatever it is, pushy sales and automation. And yeah, so if that is interesting, happy to have a chat. You've got my details, and you'll get an email after the session as well with the replay, with a link to have a call. No pressure to have a call. It's not a sales call. It's really for you, in case, I'd love to hear your insights and any questions as well. But if you do want to talk about the program, of course, that's a great way to discuss if that's the right fit. And that's the Architect is starting in a couple of weeks. So great to have a chat about that.